Hi everyone, it's Guy Spier here, and I'm joined for an updated edition to my podcast with two people, Ritavan and Paaras. I'll start with Ritavan, who's the subject of this podcast. He's the guy who, in a way, Paaras and I are going to be interviewing and asking questions, and so. I don't know how long ago this book arrives in my desk, and that's a book written by Ritavan. And I'm a big fan of anyone who writes a book. I think it's an enormously difficult and challenge, and you put yourself out there. And so, as I do, I glanced through the book and wrote a handwritten note to Ritavan saying something like, "Congratulations on writing a book." And the next thing I know, Ritavan's writing back to me and he's asking permission to post my handwritten note on LinkedIn, which had no problem in doing. And so it created this like cycle of like reciprocation and love and all these things. And I haven't even met the guy. So that's Ritavan. We'll get back to Ritavan in a second. And we have got Paaras here. Paaras is in Pune right now. He's an intern. The last time I saw him was at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting. A long while ago, he knocked on our door and dropped off a resume and made a very, very good impression on Chantal, who works with me. And Chantal enthusiastically told me I need to pay attention to Paaras. And at first I didn't, but the more I paid attention, the more I realized what an amazing asset I have in having Paaras an intern. So he's in Pune. Just going back to Ritavan, so the first time I met Ritavan was about 2 weeks ago. And, I couldn't quite place you. So first of all, I didn't realize that Ritavan was Indian. I didn't realize that he'd studied at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, which is a big deal. He now lives in Munich. So he's kind of like, but he's actually originally Indian. And so he's like part of this global tribe of world travelers, as is Paaras, who was born in Switzerland. And so with that, I'm going to pause because I've said a lot of things that both Paaras and Ritavan will want to respond to. I'll let you just say hello, Ritavan, and then I'll let Paaras say hello. So why don't you correct anything that I've said wrong, respond, say whatever you like to the audience, and then we'll go to Paaras.
Oh, thanks, Guy. I'll just add some depth. I think I read Richer, Wiser, Happier. I read your book. I read Munish Pabrai's book about 8 years ago, and it left such a deep impression. And so the first thing that occurred to me when I got my first author copies was just to send it over to you. And I never thought you'd respond. So yeah, it's really great to be on a podcast with you.
Yeah. So one of the lessons I learned from Tony Robbins, amongst other people, was you get more of what you focus on. So if you focus on the way people are persecuting you, you'll get more persecution. If you focus on people who are sending you books, you'll get more books sent to you. And it's kind of like just a weird way in which the world works. And I think in his seminars, he talks about how in driving, if you just look in racing track type driving or in conditions where it's a slippery road, if you just look where you want to go, I don't know how it works, but it's important to you move towards what you focus on. So that's just an example of that, if you like. But I'll stop and allow Paaras to say hello to the audience. Paaras, pass your message, I think is what they say in in radios along the airwaves when you're flying airplanes. So any reactions? Hello.
Hi, I'm Paras. I actually started listening to Guy's podcast perhaps 6 or 7 years ago. So being on the podcast itself is pretty wild for me right now. A bit about myself, perhaps. I've been interning with Aquamarine for the past 3 months. I had first gone to the Aquamarine office back in 2023 when I was working in Germany, and then again in 2024. I think that put a pretty good impression on Chantal and the rest of the team, which finally allowed me to have an internship in 2025. So it was a long process. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the podcast. I read Ritavan's book. I really enjoyed it, and I made some notes. I liked a lot of the ideas over there. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. And I've read about half the book and flipped through the rest. And Paaras has read the whole book, which is great. But so, well, Ritavan, how does somebody, and so questions that you've written down, unless I want to really steal them, I'm going to let Paris ask them. So I'm going to switch over to a question from you coming up in a minute, but just give us a sense of your life story. How did you end up studying in Paris at an elite school? How did you end up in Germany? Where is home? What's your background? Where have you worked?
Um, yeah, I think it's easier to connect the dots looking back, so it's a nice question to start out with. Yeah, I was born and brought up on the southeast coast of India in a small town called Pondicherry, in a relatively cosmopolitan environment. I went to an alternative school. And what that basically meant is you could essentially owned your education as a teenager. So at around 15, you got to pick exactly what you wanted to study, with which teacher you wanted to study. And I think that perfectly suited my personality, and that allowed me to explore widely, but also dig in deep, as and when I wanted. Uh, and then came the challenge of, what do you do for a formal education? Because after the age of 21, this environment would, kind of end. And so I started freaking out a bit at about 18, 19, and started looking around, reaching out to people, speaking with people, and that helped get a better feel for formal education outside of, alternative schools. And and then I decided to double down on mathematics because I felt it would keep all doors open, because I wasn't really sure exactly what I wasn't convinced enough to specialize into anything. And and I ended up then doing a couple of internships, and think, yeah, I prepped a lot. I applied a lot, and but I think at the end it was still luck. I mean, there was no other explanation of how I got a full scholarship to go and study at the École Normale Supérieure, Paris-Saclay, which is a very elite French math research institute, and I was kind of parachuted into their second year, so the first year of their masters, basically. And it was super hard. The first semester was brutal. I almost failed it completely. And then I took 2 weekends in a year, I think, and just, it was just an insane but very rewarding grind. And I essentially had to make up for 2 years of prep school that most French, students, or all French students, all classmates had gone through. And so that's what that, once I scoped the problem correctly, it was all about, putting my head down and working through it. And of course, didn't kind of reach the exact same level, but then it allowed me to complete the first year, get into a second year specialization, which happened to be machine learning, which was, just when the AI, kind of one of the AI hype waves of that time, was taking off, because DeepMind had built an algorithm that beat one of the then Go world champions. And Go was always considered a game that, computers would struggle at, because chess, is kind of deterministic, and you work backwards on a decision tree and all of that. And so chess, with Kasparov, uh, had already been sort of worked on before, and Go was extremely exciting. That's when I graduated, when the financial crisis had really sort of scarred me as a teenager, even though it didn't affect me, but just seeing the great financial crisis happening, following it closely, was something that fascinated me. And so I ended up doing a 6-month internship at the end of my master's at SocGen, at their global headquarters in Paris, working on market risk models that were data driven, that were machine learning based. And yeah, and then Brexit happened. I thought I'd go to a quant hedge fund and retire in London. And with Brexit, that plan was deleted before I could even get started. And yeah, one thing led to another. It was quite scary as an expat, actually, looking for a job at that point. But then I got the best opportunity at an American hedge fund trading commodities in Berlin. And so I moved to Germany, and finally got to speak German, which I grew up speaking in India with my aunt, who was German. And yeah, and then after trading power, I moved to a consultancy and worked across a bunch of sectors, basically always around creating value with data. And and then I wrote, Munich is home, and last year I kind of decided to write this book based on a decade or so of operating. and full of the scars and the battle scars and the ups and downs of what works, what doesn't work, and what kind of focus matters. So yeah, that's my story in
Yeah,
brief.
it's an amazing story, and just a few sort of like follow-ons from that before I cold call you, Paras, is well, first of all, just a general question: why does France have the best mathematicians in the world? Uh, yeah, why?
So that's actually historically very interesting because you had the Industrial Revolution in England, and then Germany industrialized later, and France somehow really has dominated mathematics for centuries. And and I think to a large extent, I mean, yes, I think the Grande École system had just about started towards Louis the 14th around that time before the French Revolution. But it's really Napoleon, I think, who laid the foundation because he himself was trained in mathematics and sort of was very much a first principles thinker in all his battles. He would really, even as a marshal, as a general, a marshal, and later on as emperor, would really take the time to understand the battlefield, do intel himself on the ground, work back from these first principles. And so I think he really appreciated sort of a rigorous analytical approach to thinking, and sort of led to this Grande École system, which created a very sort of elitist track for any smart and ambitious person, and then that builds a nice flywheel over time.
In fact, to the degree to which, when I sort of glanced at pages of your book and I saw that you'd studied mathematics, I don't know if you remember in our call, I just assumed you'd studied at the École Polytechnique. But I guess there are mathematicians that are good mathematicians that don't study at the École Polytechnique. École Polytechnique is kind of a naval school in France, and basically, if somebody they're called a X. If
Mm.
you're one of those, you kind of like everybody knows to kind of make way for the you intellectually type of deal. For me, École Normale Supérieure is more literary, actually. But I didn't even. It was only you. I realized it also has a maths division, if you like. And I'm
So,
sure that there are plenty of famous mathematicians who've graduated from the École Normale Supérieure. Can you name one or two just for fun?
yeah, I mean, most field medalists recently, like Wendelin Werner and Cédric Villani, and all of them are from the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, Rue d'Ulm. And I was in the École Normale Supérieure, used to be called Cachan, now it's called Paris-Saclay.
Yeah,
But they're basically three that were historically founded: the one in the center of Paris, the one in the outskirts of Paris, and one in Lyon. And now there's a new one in Rennes.
yeah.
And they all have their specializations. So the one in Paris, in the center of Paris, is very much theoretical. So a lot of literature, philosophy, etc., and pure math. The one I went to was a lot more, had the humanities, but also had the natural sciences and engineering sciences. And the one in Lyon is also pretty strong in physics and applied math.
I think that I've seen the guy Cedric lecture. He's just a very flamboyant, very unusual figure. They're like sort of eccentric to the power of eccentric. But I won't dwell on that. What I wanted to ask you for just briefly, I mean, you grew up in Pondicherry, which I didn't even realize it's a bit like Goa but French. Goa
Hmm.
being Portuguese, and in English you have a very light, but you can tell that you speak with a kind of an Indian accent. When you're speaking French or German, how do you sound, and how long into a conversation with somebody in France or Germany do they say, "Where are you from?" Then if you say, "Well, actually Paris," or actually Berlin, or actually Munich, they say, "No, where are you really from?"
Yeah. So the funny story is I learned French in kindergarten, so it's from the age of 3, speaking it in school, and also at home. And a funny story, like my kindergarten teacher was Indian, but of Iraqi Jewish origin. So it was really insanely diverse, like the kind of the kind of environment I grew up in. It was really nice, and so yeah, my accent in English is very Indian. My accent in French was pretty Indian until I landed in Paris, and yeah, I'd read a lot of the French literary classics. And so, I have my Alexandre Dumas and etc. under my belt, my Jules Verne, and I come with that vocabulary, the vocabulary of those times, with a thick Indian accent. So that was very weird for people initially. And one of my friends, very smart guy, who's just completed his PhD at Polytechnique. He's now starting out as an assistant professor. And what he told me is, look, you need to learn Parisian because if you want to be respected here on the street, forget what you know. Scrub that accent off. Learn slang. Learn verlan, which is where you invert vowels and syllables. And he gave me a playlist of French rap, and so for me it was really putting on French rap and doing math proofs for a year, and my accent was gone.
You need to share that playlist of French rap because I want to get into it. And interestingly enough, I so anyway, I don't want to dive into my personal stuff, but uh if you had to choose between living exclusively 9 months in the year in either France or Germany, because which would you choose?
I So the unfortunate thing is I haven't seen all of Germany, but if I had to choose between Paris and Munich, it would be Munich.
Oh
Uh,
my God. Are you serious?
yeah, I'm a
You know,
small town guy,
we'll make
it's
sure that we delete that from all the French crowd. That's amazing. That's quite a statement.
yeah, that's
Explain yourself.
Yeah, I think Paris is just too big. Paris, London, they're just way too big. I'm a small town guy. I like this cosmopolitan vibe, which I think Munich has, or I think Zurich would have too. But it's not too big. I think that's nice, and it's very close to nature, and that suits me.
That's
Um,
that, that's fascinating. So Paris, I think I know what your first question is going to be, but you can go anywhere you like. So go ahead.
So, I'm actually very curious. What do you think the first question would be?
I'm looking at your questions. So Paris has got like he did a cheat sheet for me because but I just thought it would end up being the first question, but feel free.
No, actually, it was the third question that I was thinking about. But anyway,
No, go ahead because so just very briefly. Um, I strongly believe that curiosity is much more than just your brain leading you astray. It's a seeking for something that is at the root. So go with your curiosity, not with I expect you to ask. So I could have constrained you. I don't want to constrain you. Follow your curiosity, Paris.
fair enough. Um, so I read the book. I really enjoyed reading the book. I read a lot of the examples that were in the book.
That's
So
the book.
Data Impact is the book by Ritavan. Do have a look at it on Amazon. I think I'm allowed to say that already. But um, when I went through the book, I really liked a lot of the examples that you had noted. So there were a lot of different case studies from all across the world, and it's fairly unusual. So I had a business education, and I saw that you took up a lot of examples from all over the world. And at the end of the book, what surprised me the most was you said that you wrote the book in 6 weeks, which for me was like, oh wow. So you probably had a lot of these ideas banging around in your head that were waiting to come out in written format somewhere or the other. So, how long was the gestation period for the book actually, and what did it take to write the book in 6 weeks?
that's a lovely question. So, um, yeah, I think the gestation period was a decade, like I said, at least,
Mhm.
as an adult, a decade of my adult life so far.
Mhm.
And the 6 weeks was, I joined a community of useful book writers. So these are nonfiction book writers, who trying to go through their first book. And the idea was to write this book like a recommendable product, right? So like you
Mhm.
want it to be useful because someone is being nice to you by, taking 90 minutes to read your book. You want to give them stuff that's useful and you want to package it in a way that's easy to read, that's fun and that's useful too.
Mhm.
And this is a methodology that Rob Fitzpatrick kind of, pioneered. And what I realized was a lot of these writers were struggling. They're taking over a year. Typically, when I spoke with people who had written books, they had taken a year or more. So many people take several years. And
Mhm.
for me, once I had sort of set my mind on it and I knew what kind of book I wanted it to be, then I just wanted to push myself as hard as possible. Once you've kind of scoped your race and you're saying, you're running a marathon or a half marathon, whatever, and that pain is there. I think the pain, the frustration, the drive, the learnings, the excitement, all that emotion is there. So you just want to compress it and then just let it out. And so once I had this SLASOG framework, I had the 6-step framework. I knew that I could take all the complex ideas and package them in a way that's coherent, that's cogent, and that can be read easily. And so I just pushed it through, around Christmas, um,
So
which
I
was
have
exhausting.
I have two clarifying questions just for the audience. So first of all, you talked about a kind of a summer mastermind group of people who are writing their first book, first nonfiction book. Can you explain a little bit more about that, and maybe even name the group, and how somebody else who's listening to this who wants to write a book maybe can tap into that group?
Yeah, of course. So the author is Rob Fitzpatrick, who's famous for writing the mom test, which is, how do you get feedback on something you've built? Because when you ask people, they will always say something nice. And then he wrote another book on how to run effective workshops. And then his most recent book is how to write useful books. And I like his approach because he really he works backwards from anything being value delivered, right? And so he then built a community where people who want to write a book could join, and he built a little video course which helps speed up because um, I think writing a book is of course the ideas, the packaging, the mental part, the feedback rounds that you want to do with beta readers. So that's all the let's say the purely intellectual part. I think the emotional part is brutal. Like I remember I would wake up every morning with massive imposter syndrome, telling myself, who the hell do I think I am? Who am I to ever write a book and have anything meaningful to say to the world? And so I think just being part of this group, joining the calls, 1 or 2 times a week. Let's just go to useful books. Just Google useful books, Rob Fitzpatrick. You'll find the community. You'll find other resources. He's done podcasts with authors who speak about their journey. And I think just knowing that, it's hard for everyone, that there is no shortcut, and that, when you're trying to do something new, the mammalian response, I think, just evolutionarily is to tell you, is to get the alarm lights going and to tell you don't do this. And so that was emotionally very hard. And so that's why the first validation from people I looked up to was so important and was so cathartic of sorts. Even if it was just a sentence, 2 sentences, that's just and to anyone listening, I think every review you write, every feedback you give is something for the author, the creator, something that's just very nourishing, because it's almost like, you've given a part of yourself out there, which is very uncomfortable, but then, you're really happy when people find it useful.
And so Paris, I'm going to go to you for the question. So we'll give Ritavan a little bit of a break. And I mean, I've read the first 3 or 4 chapters, and like you, I was you have Amazon as an example, you have Netflix as an example in the book, and then you have Flipkart as an example, and then Ritavan's talking about Napoleon. And especially, for example, Napoleon, which I know less about, and what Ritavan said now. I mean, I just thought of Napoleon as a very good commander and a bright guy from Corsica who would have never made it through in Austria or in Russia, because there was a sort of a class system there worse than any caste system you have in India. But now I want to learn more about this whole idea about Napoleon and first principles thinking. But Paris, in addition to those, were there any other case studies or sort of global thinker type sort of examples of the book that struck you, either in addition to those, or maybe you want to riff on the ones that I've already mentioned?
So there are others, but just on Napoleon for a second, it was actually quite interesting. There was one section of the book that talked about communication and communicating very clearly. So a story that stuck with me was Napoleon would keep an old illiterate soldier around him, and whenever there were to be new instructions to be issued or and Ritavan probably is going to tell the story better than I do, but whenever there were orders to be issued, they would first tell it to the old illiterate man. They'd read it out for him and then ask him to explain it. And if he was able to explain it, then the orders were a go. Otherwise, they had to be rewritten because then nobody could understand it. So I thought that was a very useful way of looking at communicating, in which you have to figure out if you can understand the world. But other than that, there were a couple of other businesses that I thought were, or a few others that were very interesting. So one was HUK24. It's an insurer based out of Germany. I didn't know about this story despite having lived there for a couple of years. Then there was an example from India, which was Bajaj Finance. And I know about Bajaj Finance's domination of this non-banking financial lending space in India, but I didn't know about their story very well, which, yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to learn about how they grew over the past 15 years. And the last one was Wise. So I've been a very proud Wise customer, and I didn't know their story as deeply as Ritavan provided in Data Impact.
And I'm going to go. So, Ritavan, thank you for those. And I hadn't come to those yet. The question that I thought Paras would start with, but now I'm going to ask, is many people are curious about business, are smart enough to do the kind of analysis and thoughtfulness that you do, but you decided to write a book. Did you, first of all, did you pick up Robert Fitzpatrick's book and then decide to write a book, or were you, so those of you who are listening, Ritavan just shook his head. So tell us about the process by which you came to decide that you wanted to write a book. If, or you can just throw that question away and respond to something that Paras said. It's your choice, really.
No, it's a very important question. I think so. For me, if you know, if you zoom out, the book is basically a productized manner in which I can communicate something useful to someone without any additional investment of my time. And as I saw, I would meet people and we would have the same discussions and I would end up saying the same things. Of course, without the rigor and the structure that comes from writing a book. So it was more free-flowing conversation. And then the realization was, I need to go through the pain and the effort of kind of building it into a product. And to be fair, a book is a Gutenberg time product, right? This is not it's not the most personalized, the most digital, and the most advanced way to communicate. So I'm trying to now flesh that out and provide other resources to readers. Whether it's in the form of short email courses or video courses or whatever. Because as an author, it's just impossible to put everything into the book because it would make it unreadable. So there's a lot of trade-offs around how you structure. And that is where Rob Fitzpatrick's book and the methodology and this thinking of a book as a product that serves a certain purpose. I think all of that thinking flows in once you know why and once you've decided why you want to write a book.
Just to be clear, I would imagine, and if so, for the audience, just that you know, so I actually got on the phone with Paras, with Ritavan 2 weeks ago because I discovered that he'd been in energy trading and I realized that he could teach me something about the energy trading business. And so we actually, in a way, met Ritavan and did a vertical deep dive into the energy trading business and learned an awful lot about it, which I'm still extremely grateful for. But I would imagine that that book is a kind of an introduction to a consulting business. And I have a rule around me that I don't want people to sell from the stage, so to speak. But you are allowed to talk about your business model now that I'm asking you directly about it. So is the goal to educate, sell books and courses, or is the goal to sell consulting business? What is the product actually, other than the book?
So the short answer is I'm figuring it out as I'm doing it. But I think the mission I've set myself is to really drive data-driven value creation for legacy businesses or businesses in legacy sectors. Let me just kind of unpack that a bit. So what we've seen over the last decades is the move from big mainframes that were, in that were essentially in the domain of companies to PCs, etc. And that's the digital revolution. And then now, we're seeing more and more data-driven algorithms. Let's just use the umbrella term AI, even though it's not very rigorous, but just so that, everyone kind of has a feel for what it means. Um, and but what's been happening is that legacy businesses, so traditionally non-software businesses, we're looking at manufacturing, industrials, real estate, insurance, etc. Their margins have been shrinking, and what's happened is in the name of being at the forefront of technology, it's all been about buying tooling, about upgrading infrastructure, etc. Computing infrastructure, storage and other infrastructure. And so they've essentially increased their costs, but most companies have really not been able to generate value. And this is something I've seen time and again, and this is something that pains me in a very deep way. And I wanted to change that. And one challenge I see is that, when you're trying to sell services too hard, and it's easy to do it today, because you just slap a bit of hype on top and then you package, and I have the expertise and the CV to do that. But that's why I wrote the book also, a bit to draw a line and say, look, uh, I will only operate and do something if I see it creating value, not do it just because someone's paying me to do something. And there's a very interesting insight from Charlie Munger's talk at UC. He was in at USC Business School in California in 1994. And it's around this excitement around new technologies. And most people think, when you have a new technology off the shelf and you use it, it'll increase efficiency, and so you will be a better business. And he uses an example from when Berkshire Hathaway owned textile mills, and someone ran into their office and told Warren Buffett, "We have textile mills that are 2x more efficient." And anyone would think, "Oh, that's amazing. We should buy them straight away and we will be a great business." And Warren Buffett apparently said, "Gee, if that's true, we're going to have to exit this business." And I think the deep realization here is that when you have new tools, new technology tools come in, even if there's a true increase in efficiency, that efficiency gets captured by the person selling the tooling, and that efficiency gets passed on to the consumer because anyone can buy that tool. And so as the business, trying to improve over time, what you end up doing is essentially just increasing your costs and becoming a worse business. And I call this sort of the entropy of commoditization, right? And so you keep buying new technology, you keep chasing efficiency, and you end up self-destructing, and you also end up being copy-paste versions. So like if, just the word utility in the energy sector tells you that it's copy-paste, that's already been commoditized, right? And then you have someone like an Octopus Energy that comes around and says, no, we're like, this is a completely unique concept, and there is no, there's absolutely no way you could price compare them against someone. And if you think about the best companies,
So
brands
sorry,
that,
I'm gonna pause you because you mentioned the name of the company and now you have to explain it. So you used a example that is clear in your head and nobody else's, and so everybody's saying, "What is Octopus?" And so now you're going to explain what's Octopus as opposed to a normal utility.
yeah, of
I
course,
don't know myself, so
I'll do very briefly. I mean, so the idea is, the just energy markets 101, it's a B2B market, etc. And then as a consumer, you have some kind of utility that intermediates between you and the energy market, right? And what Octopus does is that they incentivize you to, modify and match your consumption based on the price signal on the wholesale market. And so it essentially passes on the opportunity of making money to you directly. And that's very unique, like anyone could have done it in theory. I think the technology was there, right, for long enough. But it just takes a certain level of clarity of vision and of value you're delivering to your customer then to frame the problem like this, to build a business around it, and to actually deliver that value. And the case I'm trying to make in the book is, look, this excitement around data, AI, whatever, is not about buying technology off the shelf, right? And just trying to plug it into your business or to drive efficiency. The point is sharpen your value, like what is your core value proposition to your customer? And I use the word value because the listeners are value, investors. So the value investing community is obsessed with value, but also the product tech product development community understands the notional value. And what I try to do is marry these two, plus a smattering of military thinking and techniques. But the idea is really, take your core value proposition and use data to sharpen that, right? To counter position to other players in the market based on your unique assets, right? Your unfair non-digital advantages. So I use Walmart as an example, right? You can either try to compete with Amazon, which doesn't have any physical stores, or you can say, look, we are special. We are Walmart precisely because we have stores. We don't just understand your needs based on your online shopping behavior, which you can go and shop on walmart.com, but we also understand you based on how you shop in our physical stores. And so you want to take your circle of competence, basically, right? You want to double down on that using data, right? And then counter position based on that to build your moat, and also sort of essentially to monopolize in a good way the mind of your user, of your customer, because there's just so much out there today. If you want to stand out, you need to really have a unique, even emotionally inspiring value proposition. And data allows you to do that, but data at the service of this mission is what's going to help you get there. Right? Just upgrading to, getting a new, moving to the cloud or buying a new CRM system or a new ERP system is not going to do that. Those
So,
might be components to actually execute on it, right? But
yeah.
unless you have that clarity of vision and strategy, you will, it's all going to be wasted money.
So I'm going to riff on that a little bit, if I may. So first of all, another story that Warren Buffett's told is of the department store business, where one department store gets an elevator and the other store needs to get it right away. There's no choice. Or the one store invests in air conditioning and the other store needs to invest in air conditioning. And I'll segue from that to something that I used to do, which I've more or less stopped doing, which is great. That David, our CFO, and you could call him our chief technology officer now. He used to joke that any software that that was available for a business like ours to use, I'd already used the corporate email to try out the free version of the software, and he said that he hasn't come across, and that in a sense is on a very small scale and a very small for a very small business. Me playing with software, playing with data, playing with signing up to cloud services of one kind or another. An expression from Hebrew I like is full gas and neutral. So I'm doing all those things, trying all those things out, but nothing's really changing the business at all. I mean, I'm having fun. You actually wrote it in the book somewhere. If you want to do it as a hobby, feel free, but don't convince yourself that you're doing something useful for your clients and for your business. That actually, I mean, this is fun to discuss, and there's nothing. I don't think there's anything that we can't, that I'm wrong in not sharing here, is that, so Chantal comes along, who's a member of our team. So I had a Salesforce system, but she starts really using it to deliver value to either clients, potential clients, people that we've been doing due diligence with. So very briefly, because I'm just connecting dots in my head as I've read bits of your book and I'm hearing you. Jeff Bezos, this famous expression that in business, focus on what is not changing, don't focus on what is changing. And then at the same time, something that I figured out from the reciprocation, Robert Cialdini stuff, but I really sort of scaled up. You, in one of the early chapters, talk about, leverage your non-digital assets. And I think that I was doing it at first. Chantal picked up on it. One of the non-digital assets that we have here is just that we care more, and that we humans, and we're willing to go the extra mile to make person who has helped us feel better, feel good. So, I spend every day writing, sometimes it's half a dozen to a dozen, sometimes it's one or two personal notes to people. And we're blown away that even on an email, I'll sometimes take a printed out email and I'd write a personal note, and they get the, this whole interaction came from a personal note. So that in a way is leveraging your physical assets that Chantal then went, and she kind of a force multiplier and scaled up. So I found things in your book that I kind of reflect, I think, what you have been saying right now. Yeah, I mean, Ritavan, you mean that you can't just change your domain name to .ai and everything will become better for you right now, you know? So,
I could, but I don't want to.
but it's a very interesting distinction, and well, I'll if you raise your hand, Paris, you'll respond, and if not, Ritavan will respond. But to say, what actually am I trying to deliver? And then how can I use either innate resources or data resources that I can acquire to deliver that rather than just playing with the data and the data's there, if you like. And, you know, use my Salesforce database to deliver the thing that I define that I want to deliver to whatever focus or stakeholder group it is. It's a slight adjustment in my thinking, but changes a lot how you go about it. I don't know. Do you want to comment, Paris, and give Ritavan a chance to? No, he doesn't want to comment. Do you want to respond to that, Ritavan?
No, it's exactly what you're saying. I think it's fun to experiment and try out new things, but like I say, it's a hobby and keep that a hobby. When you're trying to improve your business, then you want to make sure that you're sharpening the value proposition to the value delivered to your customers. That's all that matters, right? Everything else, any kind of efficiency gain, like, Charlie Munger's inside, that's all going to get passed on. And if Warren Buffett said, right, when someone gets an elevator, you have to get an elevator, that's a defensive strategy, right? You cannot be the compounder over a decade as a business if you install the elevator. It's just a defensive tactic. And so a lot of technological tooling is very often just a defensive tactic to stay up to date, but it's not what's going to create the winners. And I think that distinction is important.
But so, you clearly understand Netflix's business quite well, and so they had some level of customer loyalty in the mail posted mail delivery of DVDs. But then that transition to the transition to making their own content was clearly a kind of a. I mean, I don't know the business probably as well as you do, but it was bet the business kind of decision. So if it succeeded, it will succeed big, but the whole business could have failed as a result. And so maybe it's worthwhile. I mean, how if you'd have been having a conversation with Reed Hastings as he contemplated this, how would your framework fit into that? Maybe that's a good way. Is that a good question to ask you, actually?
Yeah, I think we can leave perhaps the specifics of Netflix per se and just sort of abstract it out. When do you bet the business and how do you bet the business? Especially when there are these big pivotal opportunities, right? Because doing a 1%, 2%, fine tuning here and there is not going to make you compound and win over a decade. And I think the way I try to frame it is, and this is borrowed from Monish's book, which is think of it as an asymmetric bet, and then I add the leveraged part, leverage not in the financial sense, but in the data-driven sense, like how do you use data specifically to get, with a 20% investment and 80% return or impact. And I think when you do these bet the business bets, you want to take a step back and look at the entire distribution of future, outcomes, and then take the worst ones and find some way to, to put some kind of floor there. And it's usually possible, right? And that's why it's very difficult for me to give a specific answer to this general approach because it's very contextual, right? So it really depends on where you stand and how it's really battle by battle that you need to fight this. But I think this framework of looking at all future scenarios, kind of assigning some sort of probability to them to get a feel for, what is less and more likely, and then trying to build mitigation strategies for the worst cases, and then just executing with complete clarity, intent, and just hammering it through, I think is the way. Because, if you get into self-doubt, like also the book, right, 6 weeks was, because you wake up every morning with self-doubt. And the moment you bet your business on something, you'll have 10x, 1000x more self-doubt. And so I think thinking of it as a leveraged asymmetric bet, and that's where data is leveraged, right? So I think what I try to also argue is data is not something to be consumed. Data is not oil, it's not a commodity. Data is leverage. And so when you make these leverage bets earlier in the industrial paradigm, you had opportunities that were available in the industrial paradigm. In the digital paradigm, you had a new set of ways or layers you could build into such asymmetric leverage bets. And now in the data-driven paradigm, you can again build in a whole bunch of other things. And once you understand sort of these three paradigms, then you can bet your business even bigger, even better, and then just keep compounding that.
So,
And you have to take those bets, right? If you don't take those bets, you will flatline. It's guaranteed you will, there is
so I guess I am going to personalize it. And so one thing I heard you say that strikes me as true, even though I don't know why it's true, is this idea that data is a commodity, data is the new oil, is not a good way to look at data. But so that strikes me as true intuitively, but I don't fully understand it, and I couldn't demonstrate why that is the case. And then the next thing you've said, which is just tantalizing to me, but I haven't fully understood it, is you can use data as leverage. So I know mechanical leverage, which is where the word comes from. We all know financial leverage and the dangers of financial leverage. And now you've introduced me to an idea called using data as leverage. And I'm going to use an example that I think gets to what you're talking about, which I think worked for a certain period of time, and is less likely to work now. And I'm going to mention somebody, John Miljevic, who is about to have his Zurich Project conference. And I used to spend a lot of time with him. He's got a community called Manual of Ideas. And, he said something like, all I need is 100,000 subscribers to my mailing list. Because if I have 100,000 subscribers, I can get 1,000 true fans paying $1,000 a year from my community. And that's a perfectly good way to live. So, the idea that 100 years ago somebody could have, well, selling books or having a book is a kind of a way to do leverage. Email is a way to do leverage. But can you help me to understand in more granular detail what you mean by using data as leverage and how it might apply to my business or any other business?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm using the word leverage, but like you pointed out, right, mechanical leverage is Archimedes, financial leverage, and now data leverage. And why I use the word leverage is because the idea is always with less effort getting greater results, right? That's what is common to all three, right? Now, when it comes to data leverage, I think I want to just introduce two key ideas quickly to kind of build this out rigorously. So the first idea is that I argue there are three value creation paradigms. There's the industrial paradigm, the digital paradigm, the data-driven digital paradigm, and they're characterized by, in the industrial paradigm, replication costs are relatively constant and personalization costs are relatively constant, right? So if I make a coffee mug and I want to write your name on it, or Paras's name, every time I have the same cost to produce another cup and to personalize it. In the digital paradigm, it gets much easier now. Replication costs are essentially zero, right? So if I have an ebook, you need to create it once and then you have essentially infinite copies. Personalization costs remain, right? They remain relatively constant. If I want to write a personalized chapter for every person, right, or write a personalized section that looks at their business, all of that has constant costs associated. In the data-driven digital paradigm, now personalization costs start going towards zero because if I have enough context, enough data, and the right kind of model, I can try to personalize without any additional investment, right? And once these three paradigms are understood, now comes the question, what does leverage mean in this data-driven digital paradigm? And I like to use a framework that was created by someone in time management. The name is Elizabeth Grace Saunders, right? So she initially came up with this idea of, how do you allocate your time in a way that you get the most leverage out of it? And then Shreyas Toshi, who's a thinker in tech product, sort of applied this to tech product development. And I like that three bucket way of thinking: leverage, neutral, overhead. And I sort of adapted it to this data setting. And the way I say you should think about leverage is the following. Let's start with O first, overhead. So anything that has a one-time payoff, right? Irrespective of the investment, anything that has a one-time payoff, like a research report, like whatever, some analysis, that is an overhead task in the data-driven paradigm, because the next bucket is something that has a one-time investment and a relatively constant payoff, right? So process improvement, some kind of automation, right? So that is this neutral bucket is already better than the overhead one, right? And now the leverage bucket is something that has an increasing cash flow over time, right? And so when you think about data leverage, you look at these three buckets and ask yourself the question, when I do something, am I going to get a one-time payoff, a relatively constant payoff over time, or will I get increasing cash flow over time or increasing payoffs, right? And you can choose to monetize, not monetize those straight away, like Amazon, for example, right? Didn't create any profits. They kept reinvesting in the business. A lot of businesses, just give their profit back to their customers. And so you don't have to necessarily monetize it, but you need to create that value. And I think the data leverage bucket is really the highest kind of investment you can do that will compound over time.
A few examples from my, sort of building, if you want to call it that, building my business. So, a very, very simple example. If I collect somebody's birthday, that's a one-time collection cost, but I can then send them a birthday card once a year and deliver a little bit of a joy in a mailed birthday card once a year. But that is a one-time, there is a certain cost to writing out the birthday card and putting it in the mail, but the most expensive thing is actually collecting that mailing address and the birthday card. So that would be an example. Writing a book obviously is clearly, well, it depends on what book it is. Some books depreciate in value over time because they don't get read very much. And if you're lucky, you've created a book but it at least has the opportunity to create a kind of like recurrent revenue or recurrent interest or recurrent something. And so you're thinking, what comes up for me is the tail to the, if I write if I write a research report and it's just internal for the business, as you said, it's an overhead, but maybe I can start thinking of the research report that I or somebody internally writes as, first of all, overhead and perhaps contributing to investment decision. But then we can think of, with maybe not zero cost, but very low cost, repurposing it for some other content distribution, either in a newsletter or to personal delivery of the research report. And maybe we could discuss for hours. My last sort of like technical question, if you like, and can you help me to understand? I know that it's something that is very clear for the television and movie business, content business, this concept of windows. And you want to capture along the demand curve. You want to capture as much of the consumer surplus for yourself, and so you have these release windows, and you don't want to release the content in a way too soon to the people who don't pay for it. You want to release it last. So a movie, the reruns of the movies which are sold to B or and C television channels and are make revenue via advertising, are the last place where you distribute. The first place is first release cinema. And now that's changed slightly because sometimes a movie will be released on Netflix first, and artists are playing with that as well. But I think that that's true. And I guess I'm thinking of the business in a way that I'm in, which is investment management and investment research, that some people give their content away for free, and that's wrong. And some people build such a high wall around their content that nobody gets to see it. But I don't know. So I've kind of given you a potted analysis from my perspective. Can you help me to refine and understand better what I've just talked about?
No, I mean, I think the important thing you said was the same thing could end up in any of these buckets depending on how how it fits the bigger picture, right? And what is your notion of the value it's supposed to deliver? And that's true, right? So there's nothing that explicitly always falls in one bucket or the other. You can move it across the buckets if you choose to. And I think on, what do you give for free and what do you pay? Well, and this is why I use the word leverage in the data context because if you look at most demand, you will have some sort of power law, right? You don't have uniform demand. It's very rare. I've never seen in the real world, like a uniform demand for anything, right? So and it's not Gaussian either, right? So you always have some kind of 80-20 sort of relationship, some kind of Pareto, some kind of power law, and that's leverage again, right? Because you have 20%, driving 80% of your revenue or your profits or whatever, and that allows you then to kind of produce the paywall stuff for that 20%, but to the rest you can provide free resources. So this is how I also try to think when I do something, because yes, you have to monetize in some way to continue to grow, to create more value, but you also want to offer value for free, especially what is called, product-led growth in software businesses. But it's a bit like your free gym membership for a week, right? Or there are a whole bunch like try before you buy is something I think that's almost mandatory today. And you want to create a portfolio offering that allows people to try out, get value, and then sort of climb up this pyramid of value, right, over time.
I find myself thinking of, so there was a big switch in my little business. So I was a classic 1 in 20 guy, but I was going to lunch with Manish Pabrai and Warren Buffett, and I didn't want to be a 1 in 20 guy. So I introduced this zero management fee share class. And the what struck me is when you said demand follows a power law, and I think that we have a hard enough time thinking of just growth. Polynomial growth is already too hard for a mind to understand. We think of in terms of linear equations, but power law is a whole different thing. That if you have a hard time getting your mind around something like y equals x squared something something something, you'll have a even harder time following something where y equals a number raised to the power x. And I think of Costco and Amazon. I think of my use of Kindle, and now I don't know how many books on Kindle I've bought, but now the highlights that I've put into my Kindle, I don't know how Amazon's going to monetize it or how, but it's there's. I guess what I'm trying to say is, and this comes from the Santa Fe Institute, more is different. So you kind of even imagine what will happen when you continue to sort of like drive demand through a power law type framework, if you like. But we could go on for hours on this. Tell me this, because we're beyond an hour already. Do you do consulting? So you've written a book, you clearly do podcasts, you're creating courses online. But if somebody says, I want this guy, Ritavan, to look at my specific situation, do you do work like that? Which of course in a way is not scalable unless you get to reuse the content. But
No, but I'd love to do that kind of work. But I think I'm, like you said, this 1 in 20 dilemma that you had. And I feel I'm at a stage in life where I'm having a similar churning. Like I could just go out there and, and monetize my expertise, based on hours worked or whatever as a consultant. And I have done that, in the past. But I want my compensation to be linked to value delivered. And if someone aligns with that, I'd love to work with them, because
yeah,
the kind of opportunities I lay out in the book, the way I like to think and solve problems, I think requires this kind of alignment. And I want to move away from this 1 in 20 type of thing. I mean, of course, I need like some kind of retainer or some way, just to cover the mortgage, right? Don't want to be naive and or whatever site. So I think that component is there. I'm trying to get that component slowly over time covered through content. And then ideally, I want to be like, I just want to get compensated for value delivered. And and I think that achieves amazing alignment, which as a typical professional services, consulting vendor kind of person, you don't have. And I think this gives real meaning, and this allows you to compound value creation over years and not think in terms of, oh, this year's budget we have 50,000 left, let's just do something, right? And this is just wasteful. Like I don't want to be stationary. You have these stories of uh, of companies or government offices going and buying stationery because budget is left. You get 5,000 pens or something. And I don't. What I find really sad and wasteful is if data and algorithms are bought like stationery.
I mean, just again, so what I'm going to do because time is short is I'm going to riff on that a little bit. Then I'm going to get Paris an opportunity to either both riff and maybe ask one or two questions, and then I'll uh, give you, Ritavan, a final set of comments before we close this down. And now I need to reconnect to the thought that I wanted to riff on after having done some housekeeping. And it is going to come back to me. Yes. So if I was in so I think that something that motivates me is, and it's not got a dollar value, but so I'm in a place in my life where part of what I want to be able to do in 20 years' time is to tell great stories about how I genuinely made a difference, or even better, enable other people to tell great stories about how I genuinely made a difference. And so, for example, this call, maybe in 10 years' time, your life has changed as a result of this call. And that I will chalk that up as a win for me. That would be a beautiful thing if that were to happen. I'll keep trying that. That's upside measured in terms of stories told rather than any kind of monetary result. And I think that I think that you have a unique, a special knowledge set that can be sold on a consulting basis on a small scale, as well as being taught to mass audiences like this will be, or on online courses. But I think that if I had bespoke is the word, if I had a company coming to me in your shoes and saying, we want you to consult to us one-on-one bespoke, my answer would be, that's fine. And I want to, I need to be rewarded for my time at some basic level. But part of your commitment to me is I'm allowed to tell the story of what happened. And obviously, I'm not going to go and reveal data that you don't want revealed to your competitors or anything like that. But basically, if it's a success, which I would only take the project if I think there's a high chance of success, I want to be able to tell the story of what happened. And then me, as your future publisher, editor, book agent, will want the next book to be about how you were and actually had agency in all the stories that you told. So the stories that you're telling are beautiful stories in this book, and maybe later in the book it comes up, but the next book that you write will be how you had agency in the book. Just some ideas there. And I wouldn't work for somebody who said under no circumstances can you ever talk about my work. I have a friend who shall remain nameless who worked for a household name pop artist on a show of hers in Vegas. It would have been transformative for him. And 3 days before the show was to start, this person has an enormous ego, a household name. You'd know who she is. And offline, I can tell you, I just can't tell it in public. 3 days beforehand, she cancels the project, which she can do because she's that kind of person. And she had a slight cold or something, and his contract said that he could not talk about it. And so he couldn't talk about it. And that part of the music industry is such that if you do talk about it, even though if it's a household name, your name is trash anyway because confidentiality is everything. And it's just very frustrating for him because that would have been a breakthrough project for him. That would have branded him as somebody who worked on XYZ, think of the Police, think of Queen, think of the lead singer for Queen, something like that. So I just want that. But anyway, that's me. But I heard loud and clear, if anybody's listening to this, Ritavan is open to consulting contracts. But Paras, last thoughts from you before going back to Ritavan.
Um, so the book itself, I think, was great. The conversation has been even better because the two linking both of them together has clarified a lot of the questions that I really just had while reading the book. The case studies, along with the discussion now, I think I understand the ideas a lot better. So I guess with the courses, the email list, and all of the other things to go together, it probably would already start producing and providing a lot of value to people, even if not in business, just in personal life as well. There are a lot of ideas that can be implemented in one's own life through the book.
And from my part, thank you, Paris. I'll be reading the second half of the book and hoping that I didn't reveal my stupidity too much during the course of this podcast. But Ritavan, it's a pleasure. First of all, thank you very much for the insight and knowledge that you gave to us on the energy trading industry. That was super valuable. I feel like you're a kindred spirit as being somebody who's, third culture kid living from one culture in another culture in another culture, and I feel very similar. And my children, when they finally, having been in various different kinds of school, went to Zurich International School, in a way they finally came home because they realized that they were just another version of, an Afghan kid who had a German father and a Angolan mother, and all sorts of crazy things. And in a way, I guess a former UK Prime Minister called us as citizens of everywhere and nowhere. And we all the three of us would be accused in a way of being, by kind of certain Trump direction politicians, as being globalists. But I would say that I think that there's an aspect to all three of us which is very, very local. We care very, very much to be good citizens of the place that we're in and abide by the values of the place that we're in, and pay taxes and be a contributor to society. So my word to all you, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, all of those people, is that not all globalists are bad. Some are good, something like that. But Ritavan, if somebody wants to follow you, get in touch, how do you do that? Is the book available on Amazon? Give us if somebody wants to engage further, how do they do that?
I'm only on LinkedIn and pretty active there, so I'd love to connect there on LinkedIn. And otherwise on ritavan.com. I always try to have a whole bunch of, podcasts and free material that allows you to sort of familiarize yourself. And yeah, write to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. If you read the book and like it, write a review. I think any kind of feedback is always, makes me really happy.
Thank you, Ritavan. Thank you, Paras. See you again, and we look forward to meeting you in person at the right moment.
Thank you, Guy.